Okay, so when you purchase a powder horn, or you make one, or you acquire one of the first things you want to check is how is the end cap affixed to the horn and how many pins are in there. As you can see, this is my first horn that I ever had, and I want you to look at how many pins. There's 6 pins in this one, right? Now you can either get a brass pin, a steel pin, or the best is the wooden pins, and that's how that can be affixed. What you don't want is you don't want one that's glued in or pressed or any kind of metallic object that holds it onto the horn, because that's your explosion path if things go bad. So how the end cap is affixed to the horn is very important. I want to show you my new horn to give you a better idea. This is my new horn, okay, and as you can see, it has absolutely no pins. Why? Because it's completely press fit in here. This was press fit when the horn was wet. Now, is it a little more expensive? Is it a little bit more labor inducive? Yes, but it's a heck of a safety feature. If anything were to go wrong with the horn, if the horn were to get a spark in it or be exposed to something and it were to explode, I wouldn't get the shrapnel from this horn inside myself. The end cap would burst off. And so that's press fit, and that's what let's see if I can get it in the camera. That's what that looks like when it's press fit, when it's wet. And that's what makes it's a good safety feature to have on a horn. How it's affixed is very important. Like I said, no more than 4 to 6 pins, preferably, if you can, wooden pins, but you know, steel, there's nothing wrong with the steel or brass ones, so long as they're small enough and they're strategically placed to allow a path for the explosion. Okay, this is beeswax. I'm going to try to get that on camera. That's beeswax right there, okay? And one of the best things you can do is get yourself some beeswax, and this area where your press fit is, just go ahead and rub that in. Rub that into that seam. Just get it rubbed in there. Get a general amount rubbed in, right in the seam where the butt cap connects to the horn. And this will help a great deal with your waterproofing. After you rub in the beeswax into that seam, you take your thumb. You take your thumb and you really work it in there. Get some heat friction going with your thumb and really work it in there. And this will make your horn waterproof to a very good degree. Now, there's a trick, an old-timer's trick, about after you apply your beeswax, you apply some tallow. I don't happen to have any deer tallow, but what I do have, what you probably have at home, is a little bit of lard. A little bit of good old-fashioned lard, okay? And yeah, this is just regular lard, and I'm going to apply that all over the horn. Okay, I got a little bit of lard on my hand here. And I'm going to go over that beeswax area, the place where I applied the beeswax. And the horn loves this, by the way. This really nourishes the horn. It almost brings out the colors, makes it nice and clean and new. And you don't have to worry about getting on anything. This lard is great for leather. Never hurt the leather. And definitely good on wood. But it's especially good on your horn as part of your waterproofing procedure. And you can get a lot of life out of a horn by just applying this. Just see how it just brings that horn to life. And we'll let this dry in the sun a little bit after we get a good measure of lard on there. You just rub it in with your hands, the straps, everything. Just give it a good healthy dose of the lard. If you have deer tallow or bear tallow, all the more power to you. I would suggest using that as opposed to something commercially made, but there's nothing wrong with just good old-fashioned lard. It's the same thing. It's cow tallow. That's what lard is. And you just get it rubbed in there. And what we're going to do is, after we rub this all in, get it all set up, then what we're going to do is we're going to take our horn and we're going to hang it up outside, and we're going to hit it with the garden hose for about an hour. If the powder inside stays dry, we know we did a good job. If not, we'll know where to make adjustments. So that's kind of trial and error. But before you take it on a hunting trip, I definitely suggest that you test it with water at home. Now, if you fall off a canoe into a river, because of some rapids, guess what? Your powder's going to get wet. I don't care what kind of horn you got, your powder's going to get wet. In fact, just bring anything into a canoe and eventually it'll get wet. But for a typical rainstorm that you'd encounter while hunting, the garden hose method of testing works out pretty good. Okay, there's something you need to know about horns. You're going to see a lot of priming horns out there. The primer or priming horn is a new invention. In fact, priming your rifle is actually a new invention. Back in the day, the powder was a much better grade powder than we have today. I don't know what the recipe was, but definitely a better powder. They didn't have 4F and 2F. They had powder, DuPont. And what they would do is they would do a main charge of their powder and then just simply charge their pan off the same horn, and that was it. There was one powder, you did it with one horn, and I think a majority of powder horn accidents probably happened back in the day, and I'll tell you why. I think in a rush, especially in a hunting situation or any kind of combat situation, would it be real easy for them to accidentally get a spark going off of this and have their horn nearby or forget to cap their horn? Yeah, probably. And I'm going to show you how I think they loaded. I don't think there was such a thing, like I said, as a primer, and I sure as heck don't think there was such a thing as a powder measure. I'm going to show you how I think they loaded. Now, I don't have a musket, but I do have a 12 gauge shotgun. I want to show you how I think they loaded back in the day. Okay, so that's the end of a 12 gauge, and it's 69 caliber, and that's what a typical musket was. A Charville or Brown Bess 74 to 69 caliber was pretty common, but it gives you an idea of the opening. I think they would pour the powder down here, and how I think they would do it is I think they'd go from the powder horn right to their hand, and based on how much powder they had in their hand would be the load that they would use. I don't think there was such a thing as a powder measure. I think it went from the powder horn to the hand. And the reason I bring this up is you never ever load today directly from your powder horn into the barrel. You use a powder measure. You go from the horn to your powder measure. But back in the day, I think what they did is they went from the horn to their hand directly down the barrel based on the amount of powder that they had in their hand. I don't think they actually measured it out carefully. Now I'm going to show you what a powder measure looks like so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, this is your standard powder measure, and if you guys have been muzzle loading for years, I don't want you to get offended by this. You got to remember, none of us knew this stuff to begin with. We all had to learn it somewhere, and the reasons that we do things. You never load from the powder horn to your muzzle. There's an ember in the barrel. Any issue at all, or a spark we get in here, this turns into a pretty decent pipe bomb. So you go from the horn to your powder measure to a predetermined amount of powder into your barrel. And then on a flintlock, you have to use a primer. You no longer go from the horn to the priming pan. And that in and itself is a good thing. Like I said, back in the day, I don't think there were two different kinds of powders. Now there are. If you want your flintlock to function well, you do 2F down the barrel and 4F in the pan. I'll show you what a pan primer looks like. Okay, so this is a pan charger, and it contains the 4F. And it's a great little tool. You simply press it into the pan, and it discharges just the right amount of powder into your pan. And it's a different powder grainage. Okay, this is 4F, and it's a much finer powder, and it really helps your flintlock get going. But like I said, here's another powder measure. This one's a pre-cut one, but that's 50 grains right there every time, and there's nothing to adjust or anything. You just know when you fill this, it's 50 grains. So going from your horn to the barrel, best thing for safety. And not priming with your horn anymore, especially since you're using two different powders. It wouldn't work anyway. Could you get a priming horn, a horn that contains this powder, and then carry two horns, a big horn and a little horn? Yeah, you could, and it looks kind of cool, but not really the way it was done. Okay, you're going to see a lot of strap configurations with powder horns. You'll see everything from a simple string to leather to whatever. But if you're wearing buckskins and it's raining and you're wet and you have your possibles bag and you'll be so glad you chose hemp rope. You know, hemp rope and hemp strap and hemp cinches for horses, that was the norm back then. And it's very comfortable, very long-lasting, and very strong. And this is one of the last safety features. Somebody turned me on to this. A guy in Australia, genius. Anyway, one of the things you can do if you have a hemp strap, and this hemp strap configuration that I have here is based off one that Jedediah Smith used when they recovered his gear from the Comanches that killed him. One of the things they got back was the horn, and this is how the strap configuration was. And so that's how we know what his strap configuration was, and this is loosely based on that. But one of the things you can do is you can install a button, right? Just a simple wooden button on your strap. And this can be one of the most important safety features that you have. When you're wearing the horn, you're going to put your finger on this button, and you're going to take the button to the center of your chest. That's going to do two things. It's going to place the horn in your back away from any sparks, but it's also going to remind you to put your stopper in, because if you don't put the stopper in and you put this in the center of your back, the powder's going to drop out. So that little button reminds me to do two things. Always, you know, put the plug back in my horn, and then B, it keeps the powder horn away from any sparks. Whether I'm shooting a flintlock or a percussion, doesn't matter. This puts my body as a shield between any sparks and the horn itself. And that's what that little button does. I'm going to try to show you how that works. It's one thing to say it on video. You have to show it. Otherwise, it's going to sound crazy. Let me show you what that looks like, okay? You're going to reach up. I'm going to feel for the button. Take the button to the center of my chest, and it puts the horn in a good, safe area.
Stay safe, stay warm, stay free.
Men, you've followed me faithfully and without questions, and I want you to know that I appreciate it. And now it's time you should know where we're going. I don't have to tell you who the Abenakis are. Most of you here have lost folks or friends in Indian raids since '57.
No matter right we have.
Well, you'll find their scalps at St. Francis.